Well, good morning, New Zealand, good afternoon, America, and good evening, Europe. RORC members and guests, welcome to the PredictWind Tools webinar with expert guidance on how to get the best from the PredictWind tools and the technology. Joining us from New Zealand are Olympic Class and Offshore double-handed sailor Nick Olson, who's the marketing manager for PredictWind, and Keryn McMaster. I hope I got that right, Keryn. Two-time Volvo Ocean race sailor, and Keryn is team leader of customer support at PredictWind. Just to let you know, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the webinar. Perhaps you can type your questions in the Q&A box during the show. But without any further ado, over to Keryn and Nick.
Thanks very much. So we have Keryn, and we also have Lisa MacDonald, who's done a couple of Volvos and America's Cup and stuff like that in the Q&A. So if you have any questions, chuck them in the Q&A box as we go. This is recorded. We don't have tons of time, so I'm probably going to go through things pretty quickly, but because it's recorded, you can go back and check on see what I was saying if you didn't get it the first time. And so anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's early in the morning here in New Zealand. I'm not a morning person, but I've had 2 coffees, so we'll see how we go. So today we're really going to talk about how you can use PredictWind better, get more from it. It's really just a quick education session on how you can use it, for the Fastnet in particular. So I will actually stop this screen share and just jump onto another one. And once I find the right one, always the way. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? I'll just choose the desktop then, and then go into, sorry about that. So let's start at the beginning, and I will go through this really quickly. So PredictWind has 2 different ways that you can access our data. So we have the PredictWind app and website, which is what you use when you're at home or at the marina on your phone. That's for when you're within cell range and you've got a solid connection. Anytime you are going out of cell range or you're unsure about the connection, you would use the offshore app. We're going to talk a lot about the offshore app today. It is, it'll save everything offline. And so if you, I will use it even if I'm doing a 50 miler and I know I'm going to be in cell coverage most of the time. I will download everything before I go, so that it's in the offshore app. I can open that up at any time and have a look at where we're at. And if I wanted to, I could update my routing. But generally, I've, a short race like that, I've done all my planning, and I'll just want to reference where we're at and something that I haven't remembered. So, yeah, the offshore app is what we want to use. You can use that on a PC, a Mac, on an iPad, on a tablet, on a phone. So, all the main operating systems, it works on that. So everything that we're going to do today is actually on my Mac laptop. But as I say, I usually use an iPad when I'm using the software. So if you have any questions about that, you can ask Keryn or Lisa. We do have a bunch of weather models that we use. There's a lot of weather models out there these days, and we do a lot of work before we put any weather models into PredictWind. And so we will do studies and validate them before we put anything in. This is our list of global models. So, we've got ECMWF, got Spire, which is a private weather model, UK Met Service. All three of those are paid models. We pay to get them. Then we've got the GFS, and then the PWE and the PWG weather models that we run twice a day. And they, you might hear people say that we tweak the ECMWF or tweak the GFS. That's not actually true. We run them from initial conditions. So that means from the snapshot of the world that you get that is created by ECMWF and GFS. We use their initial conditions file, but then it goes into the weather model, the same as what they put that initial conditions file into their weather models. So, that's, the global models are great, but really what we want to talk about today is, and look at, is the high resolution modeling. And so we downscale the PWG and the PWE, and we run them at 8K and then 1K resolution. If you're not familiar with resolution, essentially it is the granularity of a model. So you're talking about land effects, funneling, sea breezes, just more detail in the model that you don't see in global models. So yeah, today we'll really talk about the PWG, PWE. We'll look at the UKMO 2K, which is we've only just added into our routing, and the AROME, which is also in our routing now. There is a whole there's a webinar that I did a while ago now on weather models. So if you want to go and have a look at that, you can. But really what we're looking for is trends across the models. And if we can get all of them saying much the same thing, then we can work with those trends. We also have ocean and tidal modeling, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But so for the race area that we're talking about, we do have the IBI tidal model, and that runs at 2K resolution, 2.5K resolution. So it's pretty good. Just some comms. If you need comms, you need sat comms. So whatever you decide to use, there is a fair bit of options, fair number of options out there these days. If it were me and I was there and I was doing this race, I would have one of these, mainly because it's fast. You can get as the data you want. Yep, you're probably going to burn through a bit of data for the race, but it's a pretty small cost compared to some of the other things on boats. And it means that you can get as much weather data as you want, whenever you want. And it's reliable, it's low power, and it's portable if need be in a situation, and you can do voice on it if you need to. Anyway, won't sit on that. So just this is probably not super necessary, but coverage. So these little red dots here, that's where we run all our 1K models, and these white dots are 8K. Obviously the AROME and the UKMO 2K come and envelop this whole area. So that's, not something we need to look at too much. And this is where the IBI model, the area that it's covering, that we have. So obviously this is what we're looking at. Righty-ho, so let's get into it. Okay, so I was looking at some observations before. Yeah, we do have pretty extensive observations all around the place. We can look at that in the offshore app, because you can actually download all the observation data when you are underway, which is super handy. You can get that on a sat connection as well. Nice to see what is coming up, what's happening in different places, and how the observations are lining up with the models. I'm in the PredictWind forecast website, And obviously we have all our general tools in here. Something that you will want to look at is are the wind maps. I'll just move my zoom controls. And we can come in here and we can change our models. We can have them side by side like I've got at the moment. We can change all our views, and yeah, do some comparison. So this is important because we will want to have a look at these models later. We can look at them with our routing. Obviously, the reason that we have weather routing is I look at this and I go, you know, how would I 100% decide what the best thing was? All routing tools are very clever. And, you know, they're putting a whole lot of things together that the human brain can't. So a lot of stuff in here. You should be doing your pre-race analysis in here, you know, wind maps, gust maps, comparing different models, looking at things. Something I do want to touch on in here is that we do have a validation tool. There's no point in me sitting here telling you what I think is good or whatever, or not good. We do have a validation tool, so I'll just click on that now. And so this is all location based. I've set a location up in Cowes, and this is looking at the previous week, and it's comparing an observation point, which I can show you where we're looking at. Whoops, big zoomy fingers. Sorry, come across here. And we can see that we're using this observation here and comparing all of the data from the models. So if I scroll back up here, so for the last week, and we're looking at the 1 day. So, and what I mean by that is we're looking at today, you know, the first day of forecast. So the first 24 hours of forecast, and we've got the mean average error. And so it's ranked the models for wind speed and wind direction. So worth going and having a look at this, and looking at a few different locations, seeing what models are performing well, just because they're 100% right. And, well, you know, there might be the leader in here. Doesn't mean to say that that's the case all the time. And, you know, and we would still want to go and validate against what's happening in the observations. But a nice way to start thinking about what, you know, if you had to decide on a model, you might put more weight on one than the other. But the reality is we do want to try and look for consensus across the models. So that was we won't dwell on any of that stuff anymore, but I did want you to sort of point out that tool is there and is pretty useful. So we want to do weather routing for the race. So I've come down here to the tools and weather routing. Obviously, this is different to the offshore app. We won't spend too long in here, but I do need to show you how to set up your polars. So I've got a course set in here, but that's not really what we're here for. I'm going to want to come up here to routing preferences, and I'm going to set up the polars for my boat. So if you don't know what polars are, they are essentially how fast the software thinks your boat is going to go in any given conditions. There's a few ways you can do this. I didn't mention the data hub at the beginning. So we have a little product called a data hub. It can actually plug into your NMEA backbone and read all your data. And from there, it can update your base polar. It's very clever. We have a gentleman that did the AI for Team New Zealand in the last America's Cup. He does all of our data, you know, smarts on how that data hub works for polars, and it's pretty cool what it's doing. So, but for those of us that don't have that, or think, you know, that's a bit technical, or don't have want to do that, we can come in here and we can have a predefined polar, and you'll see here, one of my friends has got a Beneteau 423, but we have a big list of boats in here. If your boat isn't in here, just choose one that you know has similar performance, and then we can tweak the polars later. And for basically, even if your boat is in here, I would still be tweaking the polars. So for instance, boat that I sail on, it's a custom boat, and it's 35 footer, but I know it's pretty similar in lots of respects to a FAR 40 in terms of speed, but we have a few different areas where we're a bit faster and a bit slower. So I took that FAR 40 polar and then I adjusted it. So we can come down here and we can choose a polar, and because I'm a two-handed fan, we'll go for the JPK. So I've got that in there. That would actually, you'll see here, it's updated this polar curve over here. I would definitely go and look at what that one there is doing. There's a button here that says motoring. We don't want to do that because we're racing, obviously. And so anyway, I've got that set up there, and I've got that predefined polar in there. What I want to do, so I can see my polar, is I want to click on that copy to advanced polar button, and I can come over here and I can click on the advanced button, and this is where I can see my full polar table. And so I can adjust anything I want in here. And this, let's get rid of those 0 columns. We don't need them. And again, we've got I haven't looked at this polar beforehand. We've got a very complex polar in here. We don't actually need these high these angles that we're not going to sail. We just want we want to be at our optimum sailing angles. So what we're looking at here, true wind speed down here, true wind angle here. I would actually have my optimum upwind true wind angles in here for each wind speed, and then we have the boat speed. So 14 knots, 36 degrees true wind angle, and then it thinks that we're going to do 6.6 knots of boat speed. So you can come in here and you can adjust this. I would definitely simplify this polar. There is a lot of wind angles in here, and yes, you can do that if you want to, but you can also simplify it, and it will simplify your polar curve, and interpolate in between each point. Over here as well, I would, unless I would actually have my optimum downwind angles set up in here, my VMG downwind angles. So if you want to, you can also import your polar. So if you have a ORC polars or whatever, you can import them into here. You can also export your polars and put them in a spreadsheet and play around and work through it. I would 100% recommend you do this. The better you can get your polars, the more accurate your routing is going to be. And if you do want to get really smart on it, I would get a data hub and actually have the data hub updating your polars. It's pretty clever. So we've got our polar set up, and you'll see down here we have the wave, this thing here we call a wave polar. This is really, really important. We do want to use this. What the wave polar is going to do is, hang on, I'm just going to go back to predefined because I know that's not how heavy that boat is. Here we go. You need to use this wave polar. It is super awesome. So it is going to, in your weather routing, it is going to calculate the wind wave, the primary swell, secondary swell, and tertiary swell if they're there. And it's going to, obviously, if it's windy and wavy, it will actually model that and slow the boat down to as it would be in real life, and the same with downwind. If you're in the waves, it'll speed you up. So you'll see the polar going, actually going above and below its suggested, its base polar. There's some other outputs there that it gives us that are really helpful for understanding what conditions we're going to be in. So we'll look at that as we go on. But 100% you should be using the wave polar. This advanced wave polar over here is actually our old wave polar, and you have to set that up and do that manually. Not many people did it, and that was why we developed this tool here. It's actually making a pretty simple model of your boat. These are the dimensions that it wants to see, and from there it's calculating your wave action. Whoops. So we do, while we're still in polars, we can adjust the rest of this stuff in the offshore app, but if we want to set up our advanced polar, or we do need to come in here, set it up in our account and go from there. So yeah, we'll look at the rest of this in the offshore app. Yeah. Okie doke. So I'm going to go back to weather routing. Sorry, yeah. And, we could run our route and we can look at it. In fact, let's just, no, we'll go into the offshore app. So yeah, if you want to, instead of working, you can sit here on your laptop and run weather routes for the next couple of weeks. That's what I would do. I mean, I've been working, of course, but because I work doing this. But yeah, sit there, run weather routes every day, and look at the currents and the the different weather systems, the different weather models. Look at that validation and start thinking about what happens as you go through the course. So I am going to stop sharing there, and we're going to flick over to the offshore app. So we're in the offshore app on my laptop. As mentioned before, you can do this on an iPad or a tablet. I'm a massive fan of doing it on the laptop because it's got a nice big screen and you can see lots of what's going on. I'll just have a drink of water. What we're actually looking at here is the tidal model, and you'll see as I move this time slider, it changing, and yeah. All right, let's start at the beginning. So I'll flick over here to weather routing on this left menu, and what we need to do before we do anything is we need to set our start. So our green waypoint here is the start waypoint. And so wherever we are on the course, when we update our routing, so whether we're doing this beforehand, before we start, and we're looking at doing our race prep, we can move this around to our start point. But if we're underway in the race, you do need to move this to where you are. There is a couple of ways that you can do that. You can drag it to a point, but the much more accurate way is to click on you can click on the waypoint or tap on it. My Zoom controls are in the way again, or you can tap on this little waypoint icon up here. And there's a few things in here that we can do aside from moving our waypoint. So you'll see here, if I move that green waypoint, that my lat long is changing in the box over here. And we could manually enter that. So if off our plotter, if we had our lat long there, we could punch in these numbers. If you're on a GPS enabled device, you got GPS on your iPad, you can actually click on that button. I'm not going to do it because it'll take me to Auckland. And so that can show where you are. If you're using an Iridium Go, there'll be a little white dot on your screen, and you can just move it to that little white dot. It's similar to these white dots, but different. And so, but you do need to obviously move that position to where you are at any time. So let's say that we have actually sailed a little way and we're here. This is a nice place to do a routing update. Ideally, we would be, if we knew that we had deviated from where we had wanted to go from the start, we might, we might run our routing again, but ideally we want to update our routing after the model runs. So we'll look at the model runs in a minute at the timings. So, and just while we're looking at this route, I mean, to me, this looks pretty good, that we've got basically all the models are saying it's the same thing. There are some very small differences here. And, you might, as to what you did here, you might actually want to think about where you're positioned against your fleet. So, are we ahead or behind of everyone? Where do we want to position ourselves? Do we think there's more wind on this left-hand side or whatever? And so you might just position yourself that side of your fleet, or lead them back, or whatever it is. But we're not just following tracks here. We're actually using this as a tactical tool against our competition. So, yeah. Anyway, I won't get too carried away on that stuff just yet. So we've moved our start waypoint. We've got our our rounding waypoint here. You'll see I've got a port rounding. I'm pretty sure it's port rounding. If I wanted to, I could also add a boundary in. If there is traffic separation zones, etc., that you have to obey, you can put a boundary in. You can add these in. I just clicked on the boundary button there, and I can add a boundary in, and I can move that round. I can tap on these and put the lat long in if I had a lat long of a traffic separation zone, and so I can put those boundaries in there. The router will then respect those boundaries. Just click on that. I'll leave him in there. I'll delete him. Okay, so we've got our start and finish waypoints, and we've set them up in our little tool there, and we can now go into our download. Don't think there's anything else I need to look at there. So I'm going to come over here and click on download, and this is sort of where you really need to think about what type of connection you are on. If we've got cell coverage, we can get high resolution modeling. If we are on, depending on what SAT connection we have and how much data we want to use, we may or may not be able to get high resolution modeling. But the cool thing is that the routing is going to use high resolution modeling regardless. So it's a really nice sort of thing that, excuse me, it's a pretty cool thing that the router is doing there. What we've seen in a lot of offshore racing is the top end programs, top end, budget boats, have had these really expensive high end SAT connections, and they've been getting all this high resolution data and running all their routing off it. The beauty of this is you can have, an Iridium Go, which is basically considered the bottom end of the SAT connections, and you can get high resolution weather routing. So it's pretty cool what the router is doing there. And it's also going to calculate using all your tidal currents as well. So, but if we are on an Iridium Go connection, for instance, we would need to change all of these time steps, the grid time steps. if we're on a cell connection, we can get as much data as we want, or before we leave, we would of course get everything we can. The good thing is anything that you do put in here that you don't replace when you do a download later, it does stay in here. So I'm going to pretend that we do still have SAT connection, a cell connection, and so we're going to get a lot of data. Yeah, but we do have, if you want to know all the settings for the for offshore, you know, you're going to need to, oh, wait, I'll just show you. You're going to need to go to like 12-hourly time steps. You're going to need 3 days, because we know that we're probably not going to take longer than that. And we would come down here and we would change our resolution. And we would start looking at, do we need to get all the models downloaded? And do we need all of these parameters? The big thing here, and I'll turn it off, is that we're getting the high resolution tidal currents. So you'll see down here, I have my file size. And if I turn that off, we're all of a sudden we're down to a file size that would actually be, you know, 274 kilobytes. That would be an easy download on an Iridium Go, take, you know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. On an Go exec, that would take about 2 minutes. So yeah, that's your sort of your different types of connections. As I said, we want to get as much data as we can. We don't actually need to download that tidal data, because I've already done that and it's not going to change in any great hurry. But let's go back to, I want to get the high resolution modeling because I want to look at that. And so, yeah, we can choose all our different parameters over here, you know, gust cape, temperature, cloud, wave, etc. This is where we can change some of the things that we looked at before. So I will look at that because we do want to know about it. So if I click on this settings wheel here, and you'll see it's got my boat polar in here. And we have these polar speed adjustments, and I've got the upwind set at 95%. You know, if I was happy with my polar, I would just have that at 100. But let's say you blew out a kite or something, you might change your downwind. You know, so you blew out your big running kite or whatever. You might actually need to change that. If you're not as good at sailing at night as you are during the day, which is most people, you might put the nighttime down to 95%, just gives you a more accurate route. We do have a tack and jibe penalty in here. And so, you know, you may not, if you think the route is putting in too many tacks, you can actually move that up a bit, and it will give you less tacks and less jibes. Generally, it's pretty good around that 60-second period that I've got set in there. As I say here, we've got our polar. We could flick over to the advanced or the data hub polar. The sail polar, I didn't mention it before, it's just a really basic polar. If you're yacht racing, you shouldn't really be using that. You should be using predefined or advanced or a data hub one. We don't want our motoring on. We do want the wave polar on. And then we have some other stuff here that I didn't talk about before. So we have depth avoidance. So if you are using a routing tool and it's taking you over land or taking you into shallow water, you might want to think about what you're doing. This depth avoidance here is it's using a CMAP depth contour. So, you know, CMAP do great charts. And so it's using a depth contour. So I don't want to go into 2 meters of water. That's pretty risky. You might want to set it up at 2 meters. Just remember, this isn't a navigation tool, but it is accurate, but I wouldn't be relying on it for navigation. So I've got that set at 5 meters, so it won't sail me into anywhere shallower than that. But yeah, if you do want it to push those parameters, by all means change that. And you can even set it up so that it's just using the land boundary. Yeah, so that's we do have if you're actually going to use ocean currents, you can change which model is being used. When we're in a high resolution area, it is going to use the high resolution tidal modeling. You'll see down here we have these advanced routing adjustments. I wouldn't, if you want to, you can get into this stuff. I definitely wouldn't be using the true wind direction adjustment. I mean, because it applies it across the whole route. That's more for if you're doing a really long route. This was actually put in for the Vendée sailors. You're doing a long route and you think that the breeze is going to be 10 degrees, one way or the other. You can actually put that in and run the route and just sort of see how you can then compare your routes. The true wind speed scale factor, you might want to do that if it's going to be a windy race, and so it's going to be gusty. Obviously, all the wind maps that we look at, they're all average wind speed. They are not gusts. The routing is using the average wind speed. It's not using the gusts. So yes, of course, it's taking every difference that there is, but it's not using the gusts in the routing. So that's where you might use the true wind speed scale factor. You might put that at 110% or 112%, something like that, just so that you felt that it was more accurately representing the actual conditions. So that's something that you can play around with. Just realize that you are actually messing with everything, and you definitely wouldn't want to have that on if it was a light wind race. So we will close that box there. So if you don't change something in here, it will stay the same. So everything, it's not going to, move around on you unless you change it. So we've got our start time. So if we were doing planning, we can actually set the time in the future. Everything we're looking at here on my laptop is based on my laptop time. So if you've come from a different time zone into this area, you will be running on the time zone of your laptop. So just an important thing to know. Weather routing, we're doing weather routing. We do have other tools there that aren't super relevant for this situation. The GMDSS, I'll leave that on. That's just a weather warning system, and we might have a little look at that if we think it's relevant. But nice to have that, outside information there if we wanted. It's written by a meteorologist. It's openly available to anyone. So it's, usable data. It's not boat specific. Observations, as I mentioned before, we want to get this because we're yacht racing. We want to see what any data we can get, good data, right? If we can see what's happening in real time. So, and as I mentioned before, we can get this over, an Iridium Go connection. Just going to click on next. So you'll see here, I am getting the high resolution tidal currents, and something else that I probably should have looked at before when we were in the PredictWind app. You're using YB tracking in this event, and so you can download all of the boat positions in here. It's a tiny file size, but means that you can see on the map where everyone else is. And as I mentioned before, tactically, that is pretty useful. So we're all set up there. Click on next, and you'll see here I've got all of my groups set up here to download. I've got my different connection types. I would need to connect my Wi-Fi to whatever connection type that is. Obviously, I'm just going to stay on web because if I go onto another connection, you won't see me anymore. And so I'm just going to click on download all. Move down over there on the bottom right. And so now it's downloading all of my groups, and as all of them download, I get a little green tick next to it. And so the important thing to note here is these grid update times. So you'll see here, this is actually New Zealand time. We must be right on the cusp of the ECMWF update, for instance, but it's still showing me last night's data. So that's really important that we know that the ECMWF data that would be in here is actually is 12 hours old. And so very shortly there will be an update. So we've got all the, we can see the PWG update times, that's the global. I come down here, I can see the PWG 8K, updated at 4:30. So knowing when these models update in your time zone is really, really important, because you might be at a critical point in the race and you might go, and these models do update at different times. And if you're at a critical point of the race and you're like, oh, we're not that sure what to do, I would download some new weather data to try and help you make a better decision. And so if you know that the PWG has just updated, because it does update quite early relative to some of the other models, you might go and download that model. So we've got all the times down here and all the different domains that we've downloaded. And you'll see we've got our high-res tidal currents as well. Observations and our YB data. I'll click on close. And we're in the tables. I just moved my Zoom controls again. It'd be good if you could find somewhere where they just sat nicely. So yeah, we have all of our tables here. We're in graphs, and we'll just run through them. And I'll just maximize my thing there. So we've got this, all of the data that we're looking at here is actually based on our weather routing. So it's not based on it is based on the high-res grids, but this is everything we see in here is relevant to our route as we go along. So you've got all our dates along here, and we've got, the trend of the wind speed across all the models. The different colors are the different models that we have here, and so we can just see what they're all doing. Interestingly, all the models think that the wind direction is going to be pretty similar. There is some small changes in there, and we can see that in the map. And yeah, we've got our true wind angle throughout the race. Yeah. What I wanted to look at, we have, we've got rain and cape. Interesting to note that. So it could indicate, is this to do with a front? Is it just unstable weather? Because if we have rain and cape, that's generally an indicator of thunderstorms. And so that's something we might want to think about. When we're sailing and we get thunderstorms, we can get some pretty nasty squalls. And so if we knew this was coming, it's something we might want to prepare for. We might want to make sure that we're ready to chuck a reef in real quick. Or, if the breeze was building, we might do that sail change early. So it's just stuff that we want to plan for. So wave height. So we can look at the wave height in different ways. This is the combined wind wave and swell. We can just look at the wind wave or the primary swell. And the reason that we might want to understand what they're doing is it's going to indicate whether it's going to be pretty bumpy or not. But when we set up our wave polar before, I'll show you, there's our current speed, which is actually interesting. This is what I wanted to look at, was our roll. So this is roll in RMS, the root mean square. We don't really need to know what that means. We just need to know that it's an indicator of how rough it's going to be. Basically, we say that if it gets above 4, which this doesn't get anywhere near, that it's going to get pretty bumpy. So that's all good. There's nothing nasty there. if you do see this, you've got an upwind race and you see this going above here, above 4, obviously the scale will change. You should be definitely taking notice of it. You might go, actually, it's going to get really rough, because we've got the different swells, the wind wave and the different swells are coming from different angles. We might want to consider the safety protocols that we've set up for ourselves on board. If it gets above there, above, whatever level you decide, but we say 4. Maybe you have a different protocol, like, you don't even come on deck unless you're clipped on, sort of thing. Vertical acceleration, again, something that can make it dangerous. And so this is actually how much your boat's lifting up and down. It's not your boat slamming, which is actually another one that we have. But again, anything above 2, and people can start to get, not everyone, but people can start to get seasick. So, if we were planning for the race and we knew that there was going to be, high levels of vertical acceleration, and this is something that a tool like this is awesome for, because you might not even think about that. You might just look at the wave and go, oh yeah, the wave looks fine. But because this is calculating all the different wave states together against your boat, it actually knows what it's going to do. And so it's just information that you could plan for. Do we take seasick pills before we leave? Boat slamming. We have no boat slamming in here, which is great. That is obviously your boat doing that, which we all love. And so, yeah, but you will see, especially if you have upwind race and it's, windy, you will see this. And something to consider is to, are the areas where this is worse than others, and do we avoid it? Is it so bad that we need to avoid that area? Okay. Scroll up to the top here. We have a whole bunch of different stuff in here. So this is for my polars. I would come in here and I would go, true wind speed is, 15 knots, and at 165, am I doing 6.8 knots? Seems a bit slow. Just check through all these numbers. You can, there's a summary in here. We've got all our wave states with all the different swells and the slamming and vertical acceleration roll. Current, would probably be to look at that in the map. Something you can do is you can export your route. So if you want to export it into some nav software, especially if you're on an iPad or something, pretty nice to, I would go and set up my waypoints and export them, but you can export an entire route. And I'll just minimize that and come over here. And I'll just stop sharing for a second and oops. Close that. Excuse me for a second. And I just need to come back to my sharing. I've just lost my Zoom briefly. And there we go. There we are. Phew. So we're back on our back in the offshore app. And you'll see we've run our route going back into here, and which is actually what I didn't want it to do, but let's zoom in on it. So we've downloaded our route, we've got our grips, and now we want to start looking at different things. You'll see here I am in a PWG model high resolution area, and as I move this, it will actually show the high res areas as I move, and then change the map as we go. And so we've got the different models that we can look at with our routing and, see all the different things. Obviously, I've run it for a really short bit there, which was not what I actually intended to do. But we can look at, and everything's in agreement. I mean, everything that, that we're basically running in here. What we would want to go and have a look at and start thinking about is our tidal currents and, how are these going to affect us? And this is something that we might need to really think about as we come in here, and probably think about beyond what even the routing tool is. We might have some specific local knowledge. I mean, you're running in here and, oh yeah, can see why the router's done that. That's actually pretty cool. You might have, if you hadn't done this in the router, you might, I mean, it's a close run thing, right? It's you coming in here and it changes on you and you actually get the benefit of it. So that could make a huge difference to what you're doing. Never know where my phone is. So yeah, we do. I mentioned the YB events before. I don't actually have one downloaded, but I can, as in I'm not an event that in an event, but you can actually view everything on the map here. Yeah, we have our ocean data. We can look at our observations. If I zoom in, I will actually see more observations. So being able to get these while we're at sea is very cool. And yeah, and we can compare how the models are going versus the observations, which is, I wonder if that's actually wrong. Yeah, so I think I've actually spoken for the time allocated, and we do have some time for questions. So I could go into more routing analysis stuff, but I think we'll see if there's any questions and go from there.
Yeah, hi Nick. Just so you know, we've had 12 questions in the Q&A, and Lisa and Keryn have done a great job answering all of them. So if you want to ask Nick a question, by all means, type it into the Q&A, and we'll just relay it to Nick in audio if you want to go that way. But we've already answered about 12 questions, Nick. So
yeah, that's the great thing about having having people on the Q&A is that we don't have too many at the end.
Hey Nick, one thing that you might want to just double down on is the routing and what models are being used, a Rome versus ECMWF and stuff.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's just download a new route and have a look. So something that we have literally this last week changed is the Rome is being used in conjunction with the ECMWF. So for the so that would cover the entire race area. So it is using the Rome first. So it will use the ECMWF once you run out of forecast length of the Rome. That was essentially a request from European sailors, is to have the Rome in there. We don't have the Rome grids in the offshore app yet. That is coming, but will that happen before the race is something I don't know, but it is important to know that you are actually being routed with the 1.25k Rome when you're looking at the ECMWF in it for that initial period. I think it's 42 hours, and then it's switching over to the ECMWF. Same with the UK EMO, we are actually using basically the whole time you're looking at that, it runs to 5 days. So it'll be using the 2 kilometre resolution UK Met Office model, which is really impressive that they run that for such a long period of time at high resolution, and it actually covers a really big area. So important to know that. Yeah, it's cool that we're using more high resolution modeling in the routing. So something just on the, well, and while we're looking at the routing here, you know, if we can get this type of consensus going on, we should be really, really happy. I mean, this is not, you know, there's some small tactical things going on here, and you might want to think about why it is. But I mean, for me, if I was doing this, I would be trying to sort of keep to the consensus, sailing to whichever model was closest to me, and looking at my competitors, and then keeping this as my broader strategy of where I wanted to go. So when we get big splits in the modeling, that's when we really want to have a look at why they think we should go one way or the other. I mean, I would consider this a big split. This is a bit of a big tactical move. And the other thing is before you get to here, you've got the opportunity to update your routing. So you might actually get to here and do a new download and see if it helps you with this decision making. But you will see why each model might want you to go one way or the other. You know, we're out in more open water. Why do they think that? Is it the wind shift? And the thing is as well, is it a wind shift that's 2 degrees? If we come up to here, for instance, and you know, what is it that makes these guys, see, I've run out of time on my grub, want to do this? And we can flick through the different models and see why it is that, you know, I suspect it's wind shift. It doesn't really look like pressure to me. So, you know, if it's wind shift, you definitely want to think about your positioning. Yeah, any other questions, Keryn?
No, I think we're all good. There's been some awesome questions, actually. You can tell that we're talking to people that know what they're doing and are preparing for a race like this.
Cool. Yeah. Do I need to, it's raining really hard here. Do I need to talk about anything else? I mean, I'm happy to.
Hey, Nick, we said a hard stop at 8:30. It's 8:30 p.m. in the UK.
Okay, perfect.
It's pretty close. But can I just say, well, that's all we got time for. A big thank you to Keryn and Nick, and not forgetting Lisa MacDonald for making this webinar happen. The RORC hope you've all had a real insight into PredictWind tools. Let's hope it improves your racing performance.